As the dramatic events in Iran and the Middle East have been unfolding, it is still unclear what do they mean for Russia, Ukraine and Iran's neighbor Turkey. This is the angle we will focus on in our program today. I am Marcin Zaborowski and you are watching Wider View from Brussels. So to discuss the dramatic events in Iran and in the broader Middle East, we are joined here by two guests in our studio in Brussels. The two are Ian Lesser, who is a distinguished fellow at the German Marshall Fund, advisor to the president of the German Marshall Fund. Ian, thank you for joining us here. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
And we're also joined by Andrea Palasciano, who is a defense, security and foreign policy correspondent at Bloomberg. Andrea, thank you for stopping by again.
Thank you so much.
Much appreciated. So, there are obviously dramatic events happening in Iran and in the Gulf since really this Saturday. So it's been going on for the last few days. Obviously, media networks are full of information about it. But what people in Europe, and especially in Central and Eastern Europe, have been really wondering about is what does it all mean for Russia's war in Ukraine? Your thoughts on that?
So, if you listen to EU leaders and the Commission here, the possible implications for the war in Ukraine are really top of mind. That is the main issue they're concerned about right now. And there are a number of things that they're concerned about. The first being that the events in the Middle East will distract the US attention to the ongoing peace talks. And as a matter of fact, the next round of negotiations in the peace process were going to happen in the next few days in the Middle East. So now a number of alternative destinations are being discussed. It could be Switzerland, it could be Turkey. So that's the first thing that is on Europeans' mind, whether they can sustain, whether the US will sustain its interest in the process. The second thing that they are also observing is that considering how intensive this US-Israeli operation is in the Middle East, is whether this will have an effect on US stockpiles that the US has been drawing on to deliver to Ukraine, paid for by the Europeans. So that's another thing they are looking at. And right now they're also observing a number of other things, such as the fact that, for example, the US and Israeli strikes have been targeted at Iranian stockpiles of missiles, but also defense production facilities. And there the hope is a little bit different. It's that perhaps that could have an impact in the material arms support that Iran has been giving to Russia, even though it was not like the most significant support that they were receiving. Still, it existed and it mattered. So those are the things that Europeans are looking at right now.
So Ian, I know you've been following Middle Eastern affairs for many years, but obviously you've been also looking into the implications here. So what are your thoughts on that? What can it mean for Russia's war in Ukraine, really?
Well, I very much agree with what we just heard. It's the distraction effect, basically, when you're thinking especially about American support for Ukraine, which is already politically difficult and sensitive as an equation in Washington. We're coming up on midterm elections in about 9 months in the United States and so on. There's only so much foreign policy and security policy content the American public and Congress is going to take on board. So the distraction risk is, I think, very real. There's also a question of just simply how this situation evolves, how the conflict evolves. There are possibilities that go beyond what we're seeing right now that would also touch on energy security in a very direct way, which would also play into the debate about how to continue this movement away from Russian supply in a secure manner. I would very much agree that to the extent that Iran was providing Russia with material support in some ways, however modest it might have been, it probably has declined in any case. That's pretty much, I suppose, going to be impossible now. And there was some flow in the other direction as well in terms of defense technology and other things. I think all of that would be very, very difficult. So they're kind of separate theaters, but they touch on each other in very important ways, both operationally and politically. But the distraction effect, I completely agree, is really the thing.
So we will be listening to President Zelenskyy in a moment. Let me just introduce that by saying that, overall, Ukraine has been supportive of the operation from the outset. Operation Epic Fury. So perhaps we can play the clip here from President Zelenskyy right now.
We see that events in the Middle East and the Gulf region are unfolding very rapidly. Unfortunately, Ukraine understands this all too well. Although Ukrainians never threatened Iran, the Iranian regime chose to become an accomplice to Putin, supplying him with Shahed drones and related technologies, as well as other weapons. Since the start of the full-scale war, Russia has used more than 57,000 Shahed-type attack drones against Ukraine, against our people, our cities and our energy system. Other nations have also suffered from this terror. That is why it is fair to give the Iranian people a chance to rid themselves of a terrorist regime and to ensure security for all nations harmed by terror originating from Iran.
So as we could hear, full support here from President Zelenskyy, and he was one of the first leaders to actually wholeheartedly support the operation. How does it square with with the risks of distraction that you were mentioning here?
I don't think it's surprising at all. I mean, I think both in terms of Iran's alignment with Russia, it's not surprising. In terms of the attacks that Ukraine has suffered from weapons manufactured or designed by Iran, it's not surprising. And finally, politically, I think President Zelenskyy has every reason to be on the same page with President Trump when it comes to this issue.
So politically, yes, but there is also another political dimension which I wanted to ask you, Andrea, about, because it's a bold statement, and in a sense it's probably antagonizing for the global South, and President Zelenskyy needs global South to be on board, but perhaps he have to make a choice, right?
Absolutely. I would say in this situation, I'm not sure that President Zelenskyy had much of a choice. What he needs more than the support of the global South is really the support of the U.S. president. And that's the one thing that has the potential to make or break whatever resolution President Zelenskyy can hope for in Ukraine. In that sense, it's not surprising. And also, Mr. Zelenskyy has those communication skills of the former showman, and he really understands how important it is in communicating with President Trump, how important it is to react wholeheartedly with words of support, really fast, in a televised form, as opposed to some written statement. So I would say this makes sense from more than one point of view, indeed. And when it comes to the what can be called a double standard, right? It's a question that has been tearing through European capitals as well, how to position themselves vis-a-vis the US strikes, whether to defend international law or whether to take the route of appeasement that we have seen repeatedly since the start of this new US administration, with the Europeans apparently deciding that it's perhaps not, I want to say, quote unquote, worth it to irk Trump over certain issues because they really need him on Ukraine.
So unsurprisingly, Russia did the opposite and condemned the operation in very strong words. Let's play a clip on this too, please.
It is particularly reprehensible that these strikes are once again being conducted under the cover of the renewed negotiation process, ostensibly intended to secure long-term normalization of the situation around the Islamic Republic of Iran. This comes despite assurances conveyed to the Russian side indicating that Israel has no interest in entering into military confrontation with Iran. The international community, including the leadership of the UN and the IAEA, must urgently deliver an objective and unbiased assessment of these irresponsible actions, which are aimed at undermining peace, stability and security in the Middle East.
So probably not very surprising words from Russia, and they have a reason to worry because they are losing their closest ally in the region if that operation is successful. But I'm just kind of wondering, on the other hand, crude prices are going up. Russia benefits from that always when it happens.
Well, and at the end of the day, Russia too doesn't have any interest in seeing a nuclearized Iran. That's for sure. I think, yes, they don't like the idea of losing a principal ally, a traditional one. It's been helpful to them in many ways. But also, you know, it could continue a process of essentially rolling up a whole set of regional allies and proxies where Russia also has a stake. Iran has obviously experienced that over the last few years with what's happened in Lebanon and in Syria and of course also in Gaza. Russia is vested in many of those relationships as well, so it's not surprising that. But at the end of the day, what is it about for them? It's about the United States and the behavior of the United States and angling for a more advantageous position in international opinion when it comes to this conflict. And I think that tells us a lot about what was said.
So, Andrea, you've been living in Russia for a number of years. You probably have a feeling of how do they feel about the Iranians altogether. And am I right to think that privately they may actually be not so unhappy about what's happening?
Well, what we can definitely see, and we have been seeing it for a number of months and years even, is that Russia has long prized itself on having this network of strong allies that it has professed friendship and support to. But in the end, what we've been seeing with Syria, with Venezuela, and now with Iran is that when it comes down to it, Russia is so deeply enmeshed in the Ukraine conflict that it doesn't have any political or even, especially like military capital to expend in other conflicts. And so I would say, regardless of how they privately feel about Iran, I think they are aware of the fact that for their power projection, this is not a great look.
It's a second ally after Syria, but they've been losing in the area. So of course, strategically, it's not so great. So I wanted to ask about another potential, well, perhaps not an ally, but a friend, Turkey. So Iran's friend in the region. Also does not seem to be very happy about the operation, about what's been happening since this Saturday. Let's also play here a clip with President Erdogan.
As Turkey, while striving during these blessed days to ensure that an atmosphere of peace, stability and tranquility prevails in our region and across the Islamic world, we feel deep sorrow and concern over the US-Israeli attacks on our neighbour Iran, which began with Netanyahu's provocations. As you know, we invested considerable effort over a long period to resolve disagreements through dialogue at the negotiating table.
So perhaps we can start with Ian's reaction to what he just heard.
Well, in some ways, different setting, of course, different environment, but in some ways the ambivalence mirrors a little bit the Russian situation, I think. I mean, there's every reason for President Erdogan to have said what he said, and for him, I think it starts with this intense dislike of Israel and the Netanyahu government and its policy and so on. That's his starting point, very much, and he has Gaza in mind when he talks about provocations. I think that's what he was thinking of, or Lebanon, perhaps. That said, at the end of the day, Iran and Turkey are geopolitical competitors in the region historically. They certainly don't want to see a nuclearizing Iran. They don't want to see an Iran in possession of longer-range ballistic missiles. Indeed, the Incirlik Air Base, which the United States uses, is a Turkish base, but the U.S. uses it in southern Turkey, is fully within range Iranian systems. So they are not only politically vested in the outcome here, but they're also literally physically vested in an operational sense.
Andrea, any thoughts you have on President Erdogan's statement?
Well, one thing that perhaps not directly related to his statement, but related to the concerns I believe that they have in Ankara as well as in European capitals is the spillover in terms of migration. I think that's going to be one that is going to unite Turkey and the Europeans in terms of what could potentially happen, because we've seen with Syria and other conflicts in the region, refugees streaming into Turkey in the millions, as well as to Europe. So I think that's also going to be one issue to watch.
And if I may, I think there's also the Kurdish dimension for this, which is very important in the Turkish view. Turkey and Iran have in a way had a kind of understanding about how to contain Kurdish aspirations in the region. This is really a touchstone issue for Turkey, and I think they can fear not only the refugee risk, which you very correctly identify, but also, the possibility of this going in some direction that essentially where Iran breaks up, or there are ethnic strains in Iran that are not controllable anymore. And the Kurdish dimension of this, among others, Azeri, and there's some others, an Arab dimension to it, it could be an important part of it. So if you were to have a new kind of front in terms of Kurdish aspirations in the region, that would be very disturbing for Turkey. They would rather deal with what they know, even if they don't entirely like a Shia regime, than run that risk.
So we have about over 10 million Kurds living in Iran. Most of who are Sunni, so as such they are not religiously aligned with the current regime. We have over 10 million Kurds, even more in Turkey, and of course there is also the Iraq dimension here. So obviously very, very interesting situation is panning out here. But I also wanted to ask you guys about the overall future of Iran in terms of its ethnic, multi-ethnic mix. Is it the reason why Iran's regime might be particularly worried about the current situation, that the country could break up into a number of rival ethnicities?
Well, I think the short answer is yes, that is a concern. Is it the leading concern? No, it's regime survival per se, I think, is what it's all about. The risk there, I think, is not just that you would have these fractures inside the country, but that they would be used, they would open a door to external intervention beyond what we're already seeing. That there are a lot of countries with a vested interest in the outcome in that case. Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iraq, others who might take advantage of a chaotic situation in Iran or seek to protect certain equities in Iran under very, very unstable circumstances, which would take this conflict into another, sort of essentially a civil war. So that's part of it, and the Kurdish element is there in that, but it's not the only one.
So we are running out of time, so just very briefly on how would you estimate the survivability of this regime? Do you think that the current regime in Iran is going to last for much longer? Let's start with Andrea on that.
Well, that is a really tough question to answer. As of now, there haven't been major cracks, I would say. As of now, the surviving regime seems to, as you said, Ian, to have dug his heels in and is really feeling cornered, as we have seen the whole conversation about the fact that President Trump seems to have extended a hand and said, let's negotiate, and Iranians responding, no, we're not negotiating. So they, at this point, seem to have hardened their position, and obviously an Iran that feels cornered cornered is extra dangerous. So, but it's very volatile. It's extremely volatile. I think we're all still discovering who exactly has been killed, who is taking over. All of these issues are not solved. So I think the dust has to settle a little bit. But it seems like it's not entirely clear what the different strands of negotiations could be and who they could be, they could happen with.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right to point to that uncertainty, and I think we need to unpack a little bit what we mean by regime change, because that could mean Venezuela scenario. Well, that could mean a lot of different things, and maybe if there is a change, it's not so much regime change per se, than change within the regime, a coup. Something that happens internally that doesn't necessarily overthrow the regime per se, but changes its policy outlook and it opens the door to some new possibilities with the country.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. This is all what we had time for. We were speaking with Ian Lesser from the German Marshall Fund and with Andrea Palasciano from Bloomberg. And you've been watching Wider View from Brussels. Thank you.